I burst into my brother's room and blurted out, "Charlie, you're gonna be my boyfriend!" He said I was crazy. We were brothers and sisters, but I immediately calmed him down. And I told him that all 11 years at school, I was considered a loser. But it was the last years of my studies, and I decided to prove that I was a cool girl and to win the love of the best guy in school, Dan. How many times have I tried to get Dan's attention? But all my attempts have failed. Everyone just laughed at me and said that Dan wouldn't fall for a nerd. And yesterday, I thought I saw Dan wink at me at school in the locker room. I realized here it was, my chance to change everything. But after hearing me out, my brother Charlie flatly refused to play my boyfriend. Oh, right? Then I said that if he did not help, I would tell our parents that I saw him doing something forbidden with the guys at the party. Charlie panicked and said he was just messing around. And I replied that if our parents found out, they would probably send him to a clinic for treatment. Then he would not have a sports career. He added that he did not expect such a vile blackmail from me. After that, Charlie sighed and asked what to do. The plan was this: I would catch Pretty Dan after school, and when we left school, Charlie would treat me with a bouquet. Dan would get jealous and finally fall in love with me, a trick I read about from a pickup coach. We don't look like brothers and sisters. You are a blue-eyed blonde, and I am a brunette with brown eyes. Charlie nodded curtly. After school, everything went as it should. I found Dan, and when we left school, Charlie was waiting for me with a gorgeous bouquet. I hugged my brother, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw how much Dan didn't like it. He was definitely jealous. It worked. Suddenly, a blonde girl came up to us, and Dan quickly left with her. What was that just now? Was she his girlfriend? I immediately told Charlie to follow them. Charlie said that he didn't like the guy and that he would go after him, just so I wouldn't be in any danger. Come on, you don't know him at all. We watched Dan and his blonde girl carefully, and at one point, they went into the park. The path gradually narrowed. We had to fall far behind to avoid being noticed. And Charlie was always stopping and showing me some leaves. After another leaf, I suddenly realized that I didn't see Dan. Damn, did we miss them? It's all because of you, Charlie. I was frantically trying to figure out how to find them when I suddenly saw a Ferris wheel nearby. Bingo! From this height, we'll find Dan quickly. The queue for the wheel was long and I was nervous. Charlie tried to calm me down and even brought me cotton candy. How did he know I loved it? Then it was our turn, and the controller offered to take binoculars. Of course, give me. It will be very useful. We started going up, and I looked through the binoculars for Dan, and Charlie kept saying it was a stupid idea. And then I finally saw Dan on one of the benches. He was having a nice chat with a blonde. We just need to go down there and eavesdrop on their conversation, but the wheel was moving so slowly. Suddenly, we rocked, and for a second, Charlie and I were so close that our lips almost touched. And for the first time, I saw his deep blue eyes so close. Wow. But I immediately pulled away from him. There was an awkward silence in the air. When we finally got down, I noticed that Charlie looked sad. I pretended that nothing had happened and said that we needed to get to Dan faster. I hoped he was still sitting on that bench. We made our way to them and crouched in the bushes behind them, where we could hear the conversation clearly. At first, they were talking about all sorts of nonsense, but suddenly my name was mentioned in the conversation. I was glad that Dan was thinking of me. But he only laughed at this masquerade with flowers. He didn't believe Charlie was my boyfriend. I was annoyed that my plan had failed. And then Charlie began to pull me aside. Charlie, what's this for? Looking down, I noticed a snake near my leg. Charlie caught himself and threw it back with a branch, but Dan had already got up from the bench and was walking towards the bushes. He heard my cry. Charlie suddenly howled like a huge dog. Dan immediately recoiled, and he and the blonde hurried away. Thank you, Charlie. As soon as we got home, I locked myself in my room and spent half the night coming up with a new plan. But I kept thinking about the moment on the wheel. I couldn't think of anything but Charlie's deep blue eyes. We almost kissed. And then I got an idea. We could kiss in front of Dan. A fake kiss, of course. I went out to breakfast and, as if nothing had happened, told Charlie about it. He almost choked and refused to participate. But I immediately reminded him that there was something I could tell our parents. Charlie and I arrived at school earlier and were standing in the school parking lot on purpose. I was worried and kept looking over my shoulder to make sure I didn't miss Dan. And now, at last, he arrived. I wrapped my arms around Charlie's neck and wanted to turn my back on Dan so he wouldn't notice our fake kiss. But Charlie suddenly kissed me for real. Charlie, what are you doing? I tried to pull away, and then I noticed over my shoulder that Dan was walking toward me. Ignoring Charlie and her kiss, Dan took my hand and invited me to the party. Oh my god! Did it really work? And then Charlie suddenly said that I wasn't going anywhere. No, I said. I'm coming to this party! Then Dan and Charlie exchanged an unfriendly look, after which Dan nodded and left. I immediately snapped at Charlie. What are you doing? Why did you really kiss me? Charlie deadpanned that he just wanted to help. Then make things realistic. Then I thanked Charlie coldly and told him that his help was no longer needed. I turned around and went home. The party was already today, and I needed a cool look. As I picked up my dresses, I banished the thought that my first kiss in life had happened to my brother, and then Charlie came into the room. He was about to say something, but when he saw me, he stopped in mid-sentence, and then he said with a delight that I was stunning. I felt myself blush, turned away, and firmly stated that I was in a hurry, and quickly left. I was looking forward to a great evening with Dan, but he immediately disappeared somewhere, and I was left alone. Everyone was having fun, and I was very lonely. I thought Charlie would support me now, but I stopped myself. At that moment, Dan came up and said that he had a surprise. Before I could answer, Dan pulled me along. Everyone parted, and then I was standing in the center of the room. Dan asked me to close my eyes, and suddenly something nasty was poured on my head. I looked up and there was a bucket of slop hanging from the ceiling. Everyone burst out laughing. Dan, why are you doing this? At that moment, he threw a glass of juice at me and said that no one liked such crazy nerds, much less him. Then Dan added that I was trying to make him jealous by kissing my brother. He was onto us from the start. Boo! The cheerleaders immediately boomed. You're just a jerk and she's the best girl on earth. I heard a familiar voice. Charlie? But what was he doing here? Charlie said quietly that he didn't like Dan right away. He was worried and decided to check on me. I pushed everyone aside and ran out into the street, with Charlie running after me. I was choking on tears. I embarrassed myself in front of the whole school. Charlie tried to calm me down and told me that Dan wasn't just worthy of me. Through my tears, I asked, and who is worthy then? And then Charlie came right up to me and told me that he had been in love with me since childhood and no longer wanted to hide his feelings. That's why he took up sports, to try to drown out his feelings. It helped for a long time, but the incident on the Ferris wheel reminded him of everything. I couldn't believe it. Charlie, are you sick? You're my brother. I staggered away from him and ran away. My mind was all mixed up. He was my brother. We needed to stay away from each other. I didn't want to see Charlie, and I didn't want to be around him. And then I remembered about something forbidden. I ran home. My parents were shocked by my appearance and began to ask what happened. But I blurted out everything to Dad about the party where Charlie was using some illicit drug. I said that he needed urgent treatment and that they should take him to the clinic. Dad was furious, and at that moment, Charlie ran home, out of breath. Dad told me to go to my room and ordered Charlie to sit down at the table. I was hurt and ashamed. It seemed like I'd made a terrible mistake. I couldn't sleep all night. One minute, I wanted to go into Charlie's room and hug him. The next, I wanted him out of my life. The next morning, I woke up to a loud slam of the door. I ran to the window. Charlie was walking to the bus stop with his bag. I looked at him for the last time, and suddenly something inside me seemed to shrink. These feelings are terrible, but I can't lose him. I rushed down to my parents and blurted out that Charlie and I were in love. There was a pause. I thought they would begin to say that I was crazy and also lock me up in some kind of an asylum. But Dad didn't just say anything. And then suddenly, he hugged me and said that he and my mom had guessed that this could happen. What are you talking about? And then Dad said that they didn't want to talk about it, but it looked like it was time now. My parents adopted me when I was a year old. It turned out that Charlie knew everything, but they asked him not to tell me about it. I was shocked. It turned out that all this time, Charlie was not my brother. But then it dawned on me that this meant that Charlie and I could be together after all. Hooray! I immediately ran out of the house. My parents shouted after me that I would not make it. The bus was about to leave, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was happy. While I was chasing that vile Dan, my true love was so close. A bus stop was around the corner, and I saw Charlie on the bus. I started to scream, and then Charlie noticed me. He ran out of the bus as fast as he could, and I immediately threw my arms around his neck. We're not siblings. I know, he didn't want to tell you, so as not to hurt you. Charlie gave me a big hug, but the bus gave the signal to leave. Charlie opened his arms. Please don't go away. After all, now we will be together. Despite my tears, Charlie got on the bus. I was amazed. Why was he leaving? But Charlie took his bag from the salon and calmly walked back to me. Actually, I was on my way to the workout, but if this is the case, I can skip one. How? I thought you were going to the clinic. Charlie laughed and said that he settled everything with his father. He gently took my hand and suggested that we take a walk in the park. And I said I wouldn't mind another ride on the Ferris wheel. He already swung his huge wooden hammer. A lump rose in my throat, but then Alex took a step forward and covered me with himself. No, you don't have to. A second later, I heard a piercing scream. Hey Paula, I dare you to hit on that guy who wanted to meet you so much. I suddenly heard from my friend in a tarantula costume. Today was the Halloween ball at her school. And today was also my 18th birthday. Hooray! I was finally all grown up. Everyone congratulated me today, even the kids from the lower grades. But this new Alex, he just looked like he was about 12 years old and he transferred to her school just a couple of weeks ago. Alex looked very shy, but almost every day he tried to start a conversation with me. I used to ignore him, but I went straight to him. I could hit on a 12-year-old boy. I wanted to show off in front of my friends. I went up to the kid. He was in a soldier costume from the Squid Game and started making eyes at him. You should have seen how he perked up. My friends, meanwhile, were watching the whole scene and giggling, but suddenly the slow dance started playing. I was confused for a second, but I quickly pulled myself together. Well, kid, you're in trouble. I invited Alex to dance. He seemed to be just glowing with happiness. I thought he would be more uptight, but at some point, he even put his head on my shoulder. Wow, new guy. While we were dancing, I decided to ask him more about everything, because I didn't really know anything, and suddenly it turned out that Alex was also adopted. Well, few people at school knew that I was adopted when I was about 6. My friends seemed to have noticed this hitch. I immediately remembered our deal again. Let's go to the closet. I told Alex. We'll dance there. Alex seemed a little tense but agreed. We calmly walked into the closet right in front of my classmates' noses, and I was just elated. Yes, I can hit on anyone at this party. They thought I'd back out of a promise. In the closet, Alex and I continued to dance, but his mood changed noticeably. He kept looking into my eyes but immediately looked away. Is something wrong? I asked with a smile. I thought he was worried about dancing with the older girl. But what he said next just didn't fit in my head. Be my guardian. You're already 18. Alex suddenly blurted out. What? He quickly mumbled that there was no time to explain. I was in shock. Did the boy lost his marbles? I didn't know what to say to that. But suddenly the music in the main hall stopped abruptly. We heard some noise and ran to see what was going on there. There was a commotion in the assembly hall. Suddenly I saw the police. For a second, it seemed to me that they were just guys from the parallel form in Halloween costumes. But no, they were real cops. Alex nervously moved away somewhere to decide. I didn't understand anything. I watched the cops approach and the other students and show them Alex's picture. They said that the boy had recently disappeared from the orphanage, and now they were investigating the case. Wasn't this some kind of prank? I heard children from Alex's class whispering that Alex was allegedly being stalked by his crazy father. He wanted to regain his parental rights. No, this was too much. Where's this boy? I need to ask him a lot of things. I rushed in the direction Alex had gone, but then the lights went out all over the hall. The commotion only intensified. In the dark, I kept bumping into other students. Someone even started screaming. Yeah, a real Halloween ball. I don't think... Out of the corner of my eye, I saw policemen with flashlights approaching all the guys in costumes from the Squid Game. I stopped and watched with a sinking heart as one of the cops took off the mask from... Alex? But there was another boy under it. I breathed a sigh of relief. But where was Alex? I tried to find him, but in vain. He was probably already somewhere far away. After 15 minutes, the police asked everyone to leave the room. Standing in the terrible crush at the exit, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Why did Alex want me to become his guardian? This thought did not leave me all the way home. I was already approaching my yard when I suddenly heard someone quickly catching up with me. Fragments of phrases about the crazy father immediately appeared in my head. A lump rose in my throat. "Hey, Paula," I suddenly heard a friendly voice. I turned around and saw Alex. "Where have you been? I've been looking for you all evening." Alex hesitated for a moment. "Were you really looking for me?" he suddenly asked. I nodded impatiently. "I need to tell you something." Alex looked me straight in the eye. It was obvious that it was difficult for him to cope with excitement. For a second, it seemed to me that he would now confess his love to me. But Alex said something much more shocking. "Actually, we are siblings." I had spent all my money on a bribe in an orphanage to find out. I couldn't believe my ears. Yes, I knew for a long time that I was adopted. But was this boy my own brother? It just didn't fit in my head. But I immediately caught myself thinking that we even looked alike. Alex meanwhile continued. He told me that a month ago, his foster mother died and bequeathed him a good inheritance. But his crazy father found out about it. Our crazy father, to be precise. Alex corrected himself. Meanwhile, I couldn't believe that all this was happening for real. As soon as the father found out about the large inheritance, he immediately decided to restore his parental rights in order to get it. At first, his attempts were quite innocent. He came to Alex in the orphanage and even brought some gifts. But Alex didn't fall for it. And then this madman finally went crazy. He decided to forcibly return his parental rights by all means. Alex was forced to flee from the orphanage. But his father found him and was now following him. I wanted you to become my guardian, because I have no one else left at all. Alex looked away. I didn't know what to say to him. I was all over the place. But why didn't you say right away? That was all I could barely bring myself to say. Of course, I wouldn't leave my brother in trouble, but I didn't have time to finish the sentence. Suddenly, a silhouette jumped out at us from behind the bushes near my house with a wild scream. "Scum!" he yelled. "Dad!" Alex only whispered in confusion in response. But this creature didn't look much like a human. The psychopath had madly rolling red bloodshot eyes. And he had in his hands a huge wooden hammer. It was immediately clear that nothing would stop him on the way to his goal. My legs began to tremble. "Alex, run!" I just shouted, but immediately turned around and stopped. There was nowhere to run, a dead end. I looked at Alex in confusion. Yeah, that's not how I imagined meeting my biological father. Meanwhile, he was approaching with a nasty grin and constantly muttering that Alex would not walk away now and would become his son again. "Come to Daddy," he shouted to Alex. and I'll deal with you now." The madman looked in my direction. My vision went dark. "Alex, I think I'm blacking out." My brother looked at me for a second and then took a step forward and covered me with himself. "Alex, don't!" The psychopathic father already swung his huge hammer. I squeezed my eyes shut. Suddenly I heard a piercing scream, but it wasn't Alex who shouted, but our father. I opened my eyes and saw several cops grabbing this madman at once. I was completely confused and couldn't stop shaking. I only hesitantly put my arm around Alex's shoulders. Then one of the policemen came up to us. It turned out that the cops had been following us after school because they immediately noticed something was wrong. But they could not detain the father immediately. They had to wait until he attacked so that the court would have irrefutable evidence of his guilt. The policeman apologized for the fact that we had to go through all this. Now our father was no longer a threat to anyone. When our crazy father was taken away, Alex looked at me and muttered, "Thank you. Thank you for that." I whispered back. It took me a while to come to my senses after the events of that day, and often saw a hand with a huge wooden hammer in nightmares. But soon, everything got better. One sunny Saturday morning, as usual, I went down to the kitchen to have breakfast. "Mom, Dad, good morning." I greeted as usual. Yes, I know they are adoptive, but they are the best parents in the whole world. At least because, after all this, they adopted Alex too. "Good morning to you too, little brother," I said cheerfully to him. Of course, all this was very difficult, but I am glad of this turn of fate, because thanks to him, I got not only the coolest and bravest brother, but also a couple of $1 million, which Alex offered to share equally in a brotherly way. Whatever you say, little brother. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. I lay with my eyes closed and pretended that I was suffocating. I don't have enough air. Newt, give me mouth to mouth. Save me. But Newt froze. And his dad suddenly bent over me and began to give me mouth to mouth. I opened my eyes in surprise. It's Newt who should be kissing me, not his dad. Before I could push him away, Newt's mom burst into the hall. She stared in shock at her husband, at me, and shouted, "What the hell is going on here?" Oh no, everything was not going according to plan at all. I was an ordinary orphan, and from the age of 6, I lived in an orphanage. Mom gave me here because she got married and gave birth to a new child. I hated my life. I had no friends among the orphans, and every day I dreamed of returning to my mom. I even searched for her in social networks, but all in vain. But one day, we were taken to the art museum, and there I suddenly noticed her. Mom was standing and holding the hand of a child, about 6 years old. Oh, so this was my little sister. My heart began to beat faster. "Mommy, I finally found you. You haven't changed much. We will be together again." I immediately ran up to her and just wanted to hug her, but Mom abruptly retreated. "What are you doing, Mom?" "It's me, your daughter." I came even closer and opened my arms for a hug. But Mom only called the guards and told them to take this homeless girl away from her child. What? The guards took me aside. I struggled, but I saw that Mom and her daughter had already left the museum. They let me go and I fell powerlessly. I've never been so hurt. The other orphans started laughing at me and pointed at me. It couldn't be worse. And then someone shouted at them to stop. I looked around in surprise and crossed eyes with the blue-eyed, tall guy. He helped me up and asked me how I was feeling. Inside, everything seemed to turn upside down. I could barely answer something intelligible. Only then did the guy nod and go to his friends, and I watched him go for a long time. Upon returning to the orphanage, all my thoughts were occupied with the mysterious stranger. I even dreamed about him. No wonder. It was the first time someone had been so kind to me. I dreamed of meeting him again, but I knew that it was impossible. One day, I was looking out of the window, and suddenly I noticed a familiar face. It was that guy. He was wearing a school uniform and was heading to the school opposite. God, this was a sign of fate. Since then, every morning and evening, I watched the guy. I had to meet him. But to do this, I needed to get out of the orphanage, which was strictly prohibited. But for the sake of love, I was willing to take a risk. In my free time, while the teachers were not watching us, I climbed the fence of the orphanage and carefully jumped off. Freedom! I remained to find this guy. I went to the school and immediately started looking for him. He was just standing in the corridor, surrounded by friends. I heard them call him Newt. Newt. What a beautiful name. I resolutely approached him and smiling greeted him. But Newt looked at me in disbelief. How could you forget? You picked me up and then we met eyes. Newt still didn't understand. And his friends were laughing at me. At the moment, the bell rang and Newt and his friends went to class, and his friend Oliver pushed me with his shoulder. Oh, I wouldn't give up so easily. Newt was the only person who had been kind to me, and I was ready to do anything to be with him. I was waiting outside for the lesson to end, and then I saw Newt coming out. I wanted to go to him, but he got into the car with his father, who came to pick him up. Newt was leaving. No, I couldn't just lose him. Without thinking twice, I threw myself under Newt's father's car. The impact threw me slightly to the side, but I pretended to remain unconscious. Terrified, Newt and his father picked me up and carried me to the car. His father panicked and decided to take me to their house. I was on my way to Newt's. Hooray! The car stopped. They dragged me and put me on the sofa. Newt's father went to get ammonia, which meant that this was my chance. I was left alone with Newt. I jumped up and pretended that I didn't have enough air. Newt, I needed to give me mouth to mouth. I was hoping that he would come to me and he would kiss me. But Newt stood in the stupor and did not move. But his father, who burst into the hall, immediately began to give me mouth to mouth. I tried to pull away, but I couldn't. At that moment, Newt's mom came into the room. She stared at us in shock and shouted, "What's going on here?" Damn, everything wasn't going to plan. I took a shuddering breath and started coughing. Newt's father explained that I was in a car accident and he was saving my life. Newt's mom immediately apologized for her abruptness, examined me, and said that they needed to call my parents urgently. They were worried. I lowered my gaze and quietly replied, "I am an orphan. I live in an orphanage, and I would so like to have a real family." From my words, Newt's mother seemed to shed tears. She exchanged glances with her husband, and they went into another room. I heard them talking about something. What if it was about me? I told Newt I was going to the bathroom. Staggering, I slowly went to the toilet, and as soon as I locked the door, I immediately leaned against the wall and listened. Newt's mom said that I reminded them of their daughter, whom they lost in an accident. Now she would be the same age as me. I suddenly shuddered. This was a brilliant idea. I needed Newt's parents to adopt me, and then I would be together with him forever. I went back to the living room and waited for Newt's parents. They immediately said that they might miss me in the orphanage, and they had to take me there. No, not now. I had to lie that I was still very dizzy, and we decided to wait it out. This was my chance to please them. I even lied that I could play the piano, sing and dance, but in the orphanage, the teachers punished us. I hugged Newt's mom impulsively and sobbed softly. His parents were touched, but still decided to take me back. The plan didn't work. Newt didn't come with us, but just wished me luck. It couldn't have ended like this. When I was taken to the orphanage, the teacher met me with shouts. He said that now I would be under house arrest until graduation. I shrank from his screams. And the Newt's parents said that they needed to talk to the director of the orphanage. While they were in the office, I didn't know what to do, and the Newt's parents came into the room. They smiled and happily informed me that I was now their daughter. I almost fainted from happiness. At home, his parents showed me my new room, kitchen, and living room, but I was not interested in all this. My thoughts were occupied with only one thing, Newt. But where was he? His parents said that he was probably walking with a friend. They suggested that I take a break, and I hid in Newt's room instead. I was looking around his room and noticed a framed photo of Newt standing with that disgusting Oliver. Well, soon there would be a photo of me with him. And suddenly I heard footsteps and hid. As soon as the door opened, I jumped out shouting, "Surprise!" But Newt gave a startled cry and asked what I was doing there. I was moving towards him and said that now we were definitely together forever. I reached out to kiss Newt, but at that moment, he ran out. Heck, I heard him yelling at his parents and asking why they adopted me. But the parents gently replied that they always wanted a son and a daughter, and it didn't matter if it was your own child or someone else's, they would love me as much as they loved Newt. Their words warmed my soul, and I suddenly smiled. What good parents Newt had. The next evening, his parents decided to have a family dinner so that we all got to know each other better. At first, Newt sat all tense, but gradually we even started talking. I started telling stories from the orphanage, and Newt was very interested in listening to them. He didn't even know how to live in an orphanage. And then I enjoyed listening to Newt's stories about family trips, and his mother said that I would remember the next trip for the rest of my life. I smiled at her. For the first time, I felt what family was. Newt and I became so close during the evening that I couldn't help but imagine us being a perfect couple. But after dinner, Newt said that he would go meet a friend at the school. It took about 2 hours and Newt still did not return. We were beginning to worry. I told his parents that I would check if everything was in order and immediately rushed to school. But it was empty. My chest ached. What if something happened to him? And then I heard some sounds around the corner. Who was hiding there? Taking a stick, I slowly walked around the corner and just swung. Newt? I couldn't believe my eyes. Newt and Oliver were holding hands and almost kissing. I froze in shock. No, that's not true. And then a branch snapped under my foot. Newt and Oliver looked around in horror. Newt immediately started saying that he would explain everything, but I no longer listened to him and ran home in tears. I slammed the door and threw myself on the bed. Everything I believed was a lie. I started to pack my things and wanted to escape. I didn't need anyone. Then someone knocked. I thought it was Newt and shouted to get out, but instead of him, his mother came into the room. She asked quietly what had happened. I was crying. I was deceived and betrayed again. His mother sighed, came up and quietly said that there were turning points in life. The main thing is to remember that you have a family that will always protect and support you. I sobbed and his mother hugged me tightly and added, I will always be there, no matter what. After this conversation, my heart felt easier. I suddenly felt a strange warmth inside that I hadn't experienced before. I had a real family. Mom, Dad, even a brother. And even if we were not destined to become a couple, we could be best friends. And as for love, apparently you can't get it against your will. The next day, I went to Newt's with sweets, but I found him with Oliver. They were hugging in the room. They noticed me and immediately stopped. But I looked at Oliver and then into Newt's beautiful eyes. I handed him sweets and asked for forgiveness. And then I said that I would not interfere and went to my room. I wasn't angry anymore. I realized that all this time I needed a family, and the main thing was that I found it. This was the love that I had been missing so much. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. I was in a hurry to go on a date with my new boyfriend. Even though he was married, it didn't stop us from dating. But when I came to the cafe, he was almost kissing a blonde. Great. I ran over to them and threw the pregnancy test on the table. Not only do we have a date at this diner, but you're cheating on me. Give me the money quickly before your wife finds out about your affairs. He turned pale with fear, laid out a few $100 and ran away. And the blonde and I exchanged glances and went to the exit. We got in the car and Blonde immediately took off her wig. Actually, this was my brother Billy. I gave him half the money. Thank you, brother. Yes, we earned money by cheating romantic married men out of their money. I went on dates with them first, and then Billy came into play in my entrance with a pregnancy test. These males were ready to give everything. If only their wives did not find out about their cheating. But even with this income, our family barely had enough to eat. Our dad left us at a very young age. Our mom worked hard, but she could not survive the betrayal of our dad. She began to secretly drink, and once, Mom saw Dad with another young girl and got very drunk, after which she was fired. I can still remember her words that day. Say thank you to your daddy. You can't earn much in a normal job. And then it dawned on me. I could become the young mistress that men like my dad spent money on. So I would take revenge on all such men for my mom. And at the same time, I would earn money. But I realized that I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. I didn't have many friends. And who would agree to such a thing? And then I thought of Billy. My brother had very fine features. And yet he was an actor. So it was easy to get used to the role. At first, Billy was against seducing man, but the final argument was his study in a prestigious theater school. He was unlikely to enter on a budgetary basis, and we did not have money to pay for his studies. To study at the theater and become a world star was the dream of his whole life. The hope that had almost been extinguished was rekindled in him. That's how we started our scams. The perfect sugar daddies usually drank alone in bars. I sat down with them, word for word, and I was already treated to drinks. And after a couple of days of romance, my brother would kick into action. I'd set up another date for my victims, but I'd accidentally be late. Instead of me, Billy would sit down with them and quickly seduce them. And as soon as it came to a kiss, I would appear in the cafe and make a scene. Waving a fake pregnancy test. We played this performance one by one. And everything was great. The vibrating phone brought me back from my memories to reality. Billy just got a call from the acting school. The entrance exam was postponed. It would be in a week. And then we would have to pay for the studies right away. Billy dropped his head. Where can we find so much money in a week? He asked. Well, I had one contingency plan. We could choose a victim of some serious rich man. There were scums among them, just like our dad. And they had a lot of money. That evening, Billy and I rented some fancy clothes. We needed to look expensive. And then I went to the best restaurant in our city. I walked proudly past the tables. I couldn't believe I was here again. All evening, I threw passionate glances at the man. But no one approached me. I was about to go home. We only wasted the money for renting outfits. But suddenly a gallant man in his 40s came up to me and introduced himself as Glam. He was wearing a suit, a gold watch, and a wedding ring. Well, I invited him to sit at the table. The game began. Glam ordered us some lobsters and we started talking. I tried to get information from him about his money and his family, but Glam kept changing the subject. And he was always joking, but I didn't want any jokes from him. I tried to touch his hand gently, but he immediately pulled it away. Then he politely invited me to his friend's yacht party tonight. Of course, I agreed. As we rode in the taxi, I was sure Glam liked me. Why else would he call me on the yacht? That's where I would seduce him. On the yacht, I offered Glam to go to a cabin, but he looked away from me. Hey, what does that mean? And then Glam suggested watching the sunset. It was better than sitting in a cabin with a small window. Glam and I spent the rest of the evening discussing each other's hobbies and interests. I didn't even notice how time flew by. But I still didn't know how to seduce him. Talking to him? The party ended and Glam drove me home. I wanted to at least kiss him goodbye. But at the last second, Glam pretended that someone had called him and turned away. He was a strange man. I got out of the car and slammed the door, and as soon as I went in, my brother Billy was waiting for me, eager to find out how it had gone. But I said it was more complicated than usual. This rich Glam didn't buy into my pickup attempts. Billy got mad and accused me of being too slow. He had an exam and admission the other day. The money was needed now, and then he abruptly and coldly declared that we had to act more decisively. Billy, how stubborn you are. Don't worry. I'll handle it. It was strange. I used to get men in a few hours. What happened to me? The next night, I went on a date with Glam again. He was already waiting for me at the cafe. And as soon as I sat down at the table, Glam said that he wanted to tell me something. But then my phone rang. It was Billy. What a bad time. I apologized to Glam and walked away to answer. Then I heard the bell on the front door. I looked around and saw Billy standing in the doorway, dressed as a blonde. He still didn't listen to me. He was striding toward our table. Billy, wait. You're going to ruin this. Stubborn, selfish boy. I quickly ran to Billy and dragged him around the corner. What the hell? My brother snapped that he had no more time to wait. He needed money to pay for the admission. Or had I forgotten about his dream and become obsessed with this Glam? I promised that tomorrow We would carry out our plan and somehow pushed Billy out of the restaurant. I caught the first taxi. We're going home. On the way, I wrote to Glam and apologized for my sudden disappearance, and had to lie that my cat was sick and I urgently needed to see the vet. I asked him to reschedule the date for tomorrow. I was afraid that Glam would get angry, but he suddenly invited me to his house. Wow. I was beaming with happiness, so I still had a chance. But Billy couldn't get over it, and he kept saying we still didn't have a penny. I felt like I was being pricked. I hated to admit it, but Billy seemed to be right. No matter how cute Glam was, I had to try and get the money. After all, my brother and mom needed help. It's decided. The next morning, I put on a low-cut dress and high heels. No man could resist. After that, I took a taxi to Glam's house. I wasn't sure I was doing the right thing. Glam wasn't a bad person at all, but I quickly pushed those thoughts away. That's what we thought about our dad too, and he turned out to be a traitor. The car was already pulling up, and I saw Glam's swanky mansion. Everything was like in the movies. A swimming pool, golden statues, a fountain. Such luxury. Glam met me at the gate and invited me into the house. He was visibly nervous. Maybe something had happened. I took his hand. Is that what you wanted to say yesterday? Glam sighed and said he couldn't make me happy. What was he talking about? He had a palace here. And then Glam said that he was once rich. But a couple of years ago, his daughter got sick. His wife left them, and he spent almost everything on medical treatment, even had to mortgage this house. What? Then Glam said that even if I didn't want to see him again, he would like me to meet his daughter Lilo. Then he timidly opened the door of one of the rooms. A pale girl of about 6 lay on the bed, under the ivies. I felt uneasy at the thought that I was going to steal the last of Glam's money. He spent everything on his daughter's treatment. At that moment, Glam's phone rang and he was called to work. It was urgent. Glam excitedly asked if I could sit with Lilo. I was confused, but I couldn't leave her alone. Glam left, and I sat by Lilo's bed. It was hard for me to look at the poor girl. I turned my eyes to the window, and then I saw a dark figure climbing over the fence. My heart sank. Someone had broken into the Glam land. There was no time to think. Then my eyes fell on the poker by the fireplace. I picked it up and walked slowly to the back entrance. The door handle turned, and I screamed at the thief. But when I saw him, I was taken aback. It was Billy. He viciously praised me for leading him to a rich man's house. I couldn't let him steal from Glam. You wouldn't dare, Billy. But then I heard the police sirens. Damn it, Billy. We're going to jail now. Half an hour later, Billy and I were in the precinct. I was desperate, but suddenly Glam came into the cell with a policeman. The cop barked that we were free, and Glam sternly told us to follow him. He took us to a nearby cafe, and Billy and I sat down carefully across him. I felt like a little girl who had done something wrong, but Glam suddenly sighed and said, "I am your father." What? Billy and I looked at each other in dismay. He asked us to finish listening to him. Dad was forbidden to communicate with us since Mom had achieved full custody, and he wanted it so badly. My fist clenched in anger. If you wanted to hang out with us, you wouldn't have a mistress. But Dad was confused and said that he was young and stupid. He thought that he would find true love. But in time, he realized that he had lost it. Glam continued. He really wanted to meet Billy and me, but he couldn't figure out where to take us. So Glam decided to follow us and find out what kind of cafes Billy and I liked. However, he soon found out that we cheated men out of their money. He was terribly worried and decided to stop us. As proof that Glam was indeed our dad, he pulled out a crumpled photo of Glam holding Billy and me in his arms. A lump rose in my throat. Yes, everyone makes mistakes, and Billy and I are no exception. And after that, we apologized to Glam. I mean Dad. And I think he forgave us after all. After that, I arranged a meeting between Dad and Mom. He finally asked her to forgive him for the pain he had caused. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I think she found the strength to forgive him. Soon, she gave up drinking and got a new job. And finally, I was happy to spend time at home with my family.
And Billy got into acting school on a budgetary basis. All he had to do was come to admission examinations in the image of a charming beauty. The commission was shocked that there was a guy standing in front of them. My brother and I stopped cheating on men, and I spent most of my time with Lilo. I think I finally realized that there is nothing more precious than family. And if you want to keep it, then only by good deeds. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you.
We crept into my room by the fire escape so that we wouldn't be seen. Chuck was about to kiss me when suddenly, gosh, the footsteps. These are them. I told Chuck to hide, but he hesitated. My parents will kill you if they find you here with me. I blurted out and shoved Chuck into the closet, and a second later, my parents came in. Did they really hear us? I was afraid. My parents stood in the doorway and said nothing. My dad sat down next to me, took off his glasses, and finally said, "We've decided to adopt a child." What the? Are they crazy? I was totally against coddling a baby, but I didn't say anything out loud because I had to get them out of the room because Chuck was still in my closet. Well, yeah. Sure, since you've decided. I don't mind, I said quickly, trying to drown out the noise from the closet. Now can I, change my clothes? My parents were surprised at the urgency, and my father went out to the closet and suspiciously looked at it, and they left the room. We almost got burned, I said and let Chuck out. This should be celebrated. He winked, pulling a bottle from his pocket. Wow, at that moment, my father came back. He had forgotten his glasses. There was a scandal. Get out, you brat! Dad yelled, dragging Chuck out of the room by the scruff of the neck. I ran after them into the hallway, begging my dad not to touch my boyfriend. But my father wouldn't let up. No more going outs. You got it? Then Chuck broke free, smashed the window with something, and jumped out into the street. What a crazy guy he is. That's why I fell in love with him. My mother was calming my father down and said that I didn't think of his weak heart. They made me go back to my room and my father locked the door. In tears, I called Chuck. He was already hanging out at some party. I apologized for my father and cried that I was now under house arrest. And soon, there will be another child here, and my life will become unbearable. I want freedom. I want to be with you. I asked Chuck to help me escape, but he said it was a bad idea. My parents would turn the whole city upside down to find me. It's lousy when you have no family. Chuck continued, I'd like to be adopted. What do you mean? I was taken aback. And then Chuck said that he was from the orphan home. Gosh, I didn't know that. He's lucky. Nobody controls him. Wait, what if my parents adopt him? Then he will be able to hang out in my room and it won't arouse suspicion. Chuck was worried that my father would recognize him and get in trouble. We decided that we would change his haircut, wash up the emo coloring, and get dressed neatly. My parents would love him. The day of the trip to the orphan home came. I asked my parents to go there with them and found out which boy they chose. Everything went according to plan. I'd met with Chuck at the orphanage, and we'd gotten rid of the kid for a while. Chuck had promised to take him to a biker race if my parents didn't see him. Chuck was unrecognizable. He played a whole performance in front of my parents. He told them how he likes to fix cars and is fond of homemade pastries. He even baked cookies himself. My mother was delighted with him, but my father was still doubtful. In addition, they were worried about the 10-year-old boy they had previously seen. After all, they were thinking about him for so long. We went to look for him in the yard, and then my father was attacked by a dog. Chuck instantly reacted and drove it away. Wow. I hinted to my dad that a 16-year-old boy is a much better option, and there's less fuss with him and much more help. In the end, my parents agreed, and a week later, Chuck could leave with us. When we got home, Chuck moved into the room next to mine. Now we will be together all the time. The first day, I was waiting for him after school, but he didn't come. As it turned out, my parents had already enrolled him in the sports section. Wow. And the next night, he was busy doing his homework. I was looking forward to the weekend, but Chuck spent it helping my parents around the house. I couldn't believe my eyes. Where was that freaky rebel I fell in love with? He even studied better than I did. Chuck made excuses saying he was interested in a lot of things and it was difficult to do everything in time. Then I asked my father to reduce his load, but he ignored me. In the end, Mom and Dad spent days talking to Chuck. Parents seem to have forgotten that they have their own daughter.
They didn't even care how I dressed or what time I got home. And Chuck continued to behave like an obedient son. We didn't go out together at all. I was hoping things would get better after the night of the rock concert. The concert was announced a month ago, and the teenagers weren't allowed in. But Chuck promised to arrange it. We agreed to meet at the entrance, but I ended up freaking outside for hours, and he never came. When I got home, Chuck said that he and my father had an urgent business in the garage. He seems to have gotten used to the good boy role and forgotten that he's here for me. I have to show him how easily he can lose my parents' favor. While he was in class, I made a mess of his room, and then I put cigarettes pack in his jacket. I spent a whole evening waiting for it to be found. A day later, I broke Dad's screwdriver in the garage and left Chuck's cap on it. I was hoping that after this, my parents would cool off and Chuck would think more of me. But in the end, even my father reacted calmly to all that, saying that the guy needs time to adapt. But Chuck was really mad at me. Why are you setting me up? He asked me once. What else should I do? I said he was my boyfriend, not my boring parents' perfect son. But Chuck said I had a great family and I was just being selfish. Oh, really? Then I'm gonna tell them that you're actually a ragamuffin who used them. I shouted and ran to the door. Chuck turned pale and grabbing my hand said, "You wouldn't dare." We'll see. I broke away and ran into the living room to my parents. I blurted it out to them right away. Chuck was only pretending to be a good boy, and that he was the boy my parents saw in the closet that day. My father was enraged instantly. He yelled that I had shamelessly deceived them, and then Dad suddenly froze. He swayed, croaked something, and started to fall, holding his heart. Oh my God! From shock, my mother and I did not know what to do, and only Chuck didn't lose his head. He yelled Mom to call 911, ran up to Dad, and started doing heart massage. What if Dad doesn't help? And Dad, I won't forgive myself for this. When the doctors arrived, my father's condition was really bad. He was taken to the hospital. My mother and I accompanied him and waited in the waiting room all evening. It was just painful. Finally, the doctor came out and said that Dad was in a coma, but without first aid, he wouldn't have survived at all. It's all thanks to Chuck. We were forbidden to stay the night there, so we came home. But we couldn't find Chuck and all his belongings were gone from his room. I understood that Chuck ran away. Everything collapsed in an instant. I felt terrible. I'm the reason my dad's in the hospital. Why did I turn in Chuck? My parents were so attached to him. They were happy when he lived with us. And now we need to find Chuck and apologize. Mom suggested we go to the orphan home together. What if he went back there? The next day, she baked Chuck a pie and went there. But the caretaker said Chuck never came back. We were very upset and were about to leave when suddenly I heard the orphans' conversation. All their squad was going to the nightclub this night. Chuck's probably there. We went to that nightclub and struggled through the crowd. Looking around, here he is. Chuck tried to run away again, but I stopped him and forced myself to say, "It was hard for me to accept how much you've changed. I don't know what's between us right now, but my family needs you." Chuck hesitated. But then Mom came over and handed him a piece of pie. "You must be hungry." Then Chuck looked confused and stared at the floor. He didn't know what to say. His freaky parents, standing around, stared at us in disbelief. Finally, Chuck looked up, smiled and said, "Your home is the best food in the world." We laughed and hugged. Seems like he really has become a part of our family. We left the nightclub and then we got a call from the hospital. They said my father has emerged from coma. We rushed there and ran into his room. Thank God, Dad is fine. Mom and I rushed to hug him, and only Chuck was left standing awkwardly in the corner. Then Dad noticed him and called him over. "Thank you," he softly said to Chuck and tightly hugged him. We all returned home together. I thought my father would hate me after my scam, but we ended up being more careful of each other. I apologized and stopped arguing with him, and Dad realized that he was strict with me. Chuck got along well with Dad and actually even shared his interests. Parents no longer worried that their foster son was a freak. They thought Chuck was a good person and didn't mind us dating. The only thing we still have to decide is, who are we to each other?